So if you got this handout there, yeah, just follow the handout. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let me just put this on. Okay, so I thought we'd focus. I mean, this it's all connected really, because this week's parsha is Bamidbar, at least in Chutz La'aretz, that is. I think I've explained before, but we're a week off, right, from Israel, and we actually had opportunities to catch up, but we don't catch up until later. One of the reasons is because once we have the opportunity, we actually want the parsha to be one Parshas Bamidbar to be directly before Shavuot. In Israel, it's not that way this year. In Israel, they have Bamidbar last week and Nassau this week. But we have Bamidbar, and we sort of prefer it that way, so therefore we only catch up a little bit later. The reason is because Bamidbar has a number of connections to the giving of the Torah, which we celebrate on Shavuos, of course. One of the reasons is that the Torah was given in a midbar. It says, Chazal tell us that it was given in a desert by design. One of the reasons for the desert is because the desert is a place which is ownerless. The halacha is if you find a lost article in the desert, you can keep it. No, because there's no ownership in the desert. And the Torah is the same way. There's no monopoly on Torah. No one has ownership on Torah. Everyone can learn Torah. Torah is for everyone. Okay. But what I want to do today is focus a little bit on today, actually, as a preparation for giving of the Torah, which is Rosh Chodesh. And this is the day, of course, that the Jews arrived at Mount Sinai. Right? So if you have a look at your handout, you'll see just a couple of psukim first, which we'll learn. And then we're going to look at a Gemara, which talks about the giving of the Torah. So have a look at the top page of there. It says, B'chodesh HaShlishi was the third month. This comes from Parshat Yisro, where it talks about the giving of the Torah. It says, "B'chodesh HaShlishi," in the third month. Let's say Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, when the Jews left Egypt. By Yom Hazeh, on this day, referring to Rosh Chodesh, as we'll soon see, Ba'u Midbar Sinai, the Jews arrived at the desert called the Desert Sinai. By Yisum Refidim, they had traveled from a place called Refidim. By Yevoy Midbar Sinai, they came to the Midbar Sinai. Vayachanu b'midbar, they camped in the desert. Vayichan sham Yisrael, and the Jewish people camped there. Neged Ahar, at the foot of the mountain. Now, bear in mind the famous idea, of course, that the word Vayichan is singular. It means he camped there rather than they camped there. And of course, Rashi brings the famous Chazal that they camped there with absolute unity, like one man with one heart. And Hashem said, this level of unity is being achieved. It's now time to give the Jewish people the Torah. And that was the prelude, the introduction to the Torah. Then it says, Moshe Allah Eladakim, then starts a whole series of psukim which describe the preparation, the timetable from Rosh Chodesh till Shavuos, the timetable from now till they got the Torah, and it starts with Moshe Rabbeinu on the next day, the 2nd of Sivan. It says, Moshe Allah Eladakim, Moshe Rabbeinu went up on the mountain to meet God. Vayikra Elav Hashem, and Hashem called him Minahar from the mountain, Lamar, saying, and then starts the whole thing. So you should say to the people of Yaakov, referring to the women, V'sagel b'nei Yisrael, and speak to the b'nei Yisrael, referring to the men, and tell them they're going to be a special nation, and they're going to get the Torah, and they should prepare themselves, and all the different instructions connected to that. Okay. So let's have a look at a famous Gemara. This is the Gemara Shavuos, and we'll look at it a little bit, and then go into it somehow. I want to go into a couple of aspects of it, and share with you an insight that's very critical to the whole concept of learning Torah and receiving the Torah. So the Gemara starts off the following. It's section B in your handout, and I've divided the Gemara into different parts. So I've divided it into 5 parts, just for reference purposes. So the Gemara says the following: Tana Rabbana, we learned a dispute, a famous dispute. B'shishi b'chodesh nitnu aseres adibros liYisrael. It was the 6th of Sivan that the 10 Commandments, the Torah in other words, was given to the Jewish people. That's one opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, B'shiva B'ay, no, it actually took place on the 7th. So this is a fascinating thing in its own right. We actually have a machlaket, we have a dispute when the Torah was given. 6th of Sivan or 7th of Sivan. So when do we celebrate Shavuos? Anyone know? Date? 6th of Sivan. Right? But that doesn't mean anything, because You might not know this, but actually, although we connect with a very great emphasis, we connect the yontif of Shavuos to the giving of the Torah, which is, in fact, it is connected. But actually, that's not the origin of Shavuos. If you look in the psukim in the Torah, it actually doesn't talk about the giving of the Torah when it talks about Shavuos. In fact, why is Shavuos called Shavuos? What's the word Shavuot mean? Weeks, right? 7 weeks. Because the Torah says on the second day of Pesach you should count the Omer, you count 49 days, 7 weeks, and the 50th day, at the conclusion of the 7 weeks, you should make a festival. That's all it says. Not only that, but the Torah doesn't even give a date, as it does with other festivals. It's not a date. There's no date given for Shavuot. Shavuot is the 50th day of the Omer. Now, today we have a set calendar, so the 50th day of the Omer is always the 6th of Sivan. Understand, right? However, it wasn't always that way. In the time of the temple, where they would establish the Rosh Chodesh on a month-to-month basis, and each month could potentially have either 29 days or 30 days, it all depended. The Gemara says that Shavuot can fall on the 5th of Sivan, the 6th of Sivan, or the 7th of Sivan. How so? If both the month of Nisan and Iyar both would have 30 days, then we'd finish the Omer earlier. Then Shavuot will be on the 5th of Sivan. If it is like today, where one of them, Nisan has 30 days, Iyar has 29 days, then it comes out, the 50th day comes on the 6th of Sivan. If they both have 29 days, it will take longer to finish the 50 days, and Shavuot will be on the 7th of Sivan, correct? So that's why it's not connected with a date. So it is philosophically, spiritually, and historically to some degree, according to some opinions at least, connected with the giving of the Torah, because it's the whole refinement and the preparation of the Omer that's linked to the concept of the Torah, but not necessarily the day has to coincide with the historic anniversary of giving the Torah. Hence, we have this machlokes, this dispute in the Gemara, was the Torah given on the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan? Now, have a look at section 2, number 2 of section B. The Gemara says, let's work this out, because there are a couple of givens that everyone agrees on. What are they? Amar Rava says, the Kula Alma, everyone agrees that B'Rosh Chodesh Asula Midbar Sinai. That it was on Rosh Chodesh, on today, that the Jews arrived at Har Sinai. That's no dispute. How do we know this? It doesn't say it in the Pasuk. Go back to section A where you have the first verse. It just says in the 3rd month after the Jews left Egypt, on this day, they came to the Midbar Sinai, right? It doesn't say it was Rosh Chodesh. How do we know it was Rosh Chodesh? So the Gemara explains. Ksiv hocha bayom hazeh bo midbar Sinai. It says over here in the Torah that it was by Yom Hazeh, this day. Uksiv hasam, when it comes to the calendar, when Hashem gave the mitzvah of the calendar in Mitzrayim, it says Achodesh Hazeh lochem rosh chadashim. This month should be the first month, the month of Nisan. It uses the word Hazeh, and Rashi over there in the Gemara explains that it was on Rosh Chodesh where Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu the new moon. He showed him how to calculate, how to work out the birth of the new moon, the cycle of the new moon to make Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, Malahalon Rosh Chodesh, just like then it was Rosh Chodesh, that Zeh, that Chodesh Hazeh, that Zeh means Rosh Chodesh. Afkan, so too over here when the Pasuk says, by Yom Hazeh, it means Rosh Chodesh. Right? So that's a very important thing. The Jews came on Rosh Chodesh. Now, hold this thought, because a little bit later we're going to go into this concept of why it was so important for the Jews to arrive on Yom Hazeh, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Why this is the day that marked the preparation of giving of the Torah. Okay? So it's a very significant thing. We'll come to it later. Go to number 3. Let's talk about another given. The Kula Alma, everyone agrees, B'Shabbos Nitna Torah LeYisrael. Everyone agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbos. Did you know that? Shabbos. Shabbos was the day of the Torah. How do we know this? Ksiv Hocha, because in one pasuk it says, Zochar Yom HaShabbos L'Katche. It says, remember the Shabbos, that's in the 10 Commandments. Or Ksiv Hasam, a different pasuk says, Vayomer Moshe Hashem said to, Moshe Rabbeinu said to the nation, Zochar Hayom Hazeh. Remember this day, meaning remember this day that I'm talking to you. Malahalon be'itzumah yishaliyom, just like over there, the word Zochar, remember, means the actual day I'm talking to you. Afkan be'atzumah yishaliyom, so too, over here when it says Zochar, Shem Shabbos, remember the Shabbos, it was in fact Shabbos. Hashem was telling us to remember the Shabbos on Shabbos. When did he say that remember the Shabbos? In the 10 Commandments, so that was given on Shabbos. Okay. So we know there came Rosh Chodesh. We know the Torah was given on Shabbos, right? Yet one holds it was the 6th of Sivan, and one holds the 7th of Sivan. So what's the dispute? The dispute goes like this in number 4. And we'll do number 4 and 5 so you get a complete picture. Ki pligi, what's the dispute? B'kviya de yarcha, the establishment of the month. In other words, the dispute is, when was Rosh Chodesh Sivan? Rabbi Yossi says, B'chad b'shaba ikri yarcha, that Rosh Chodesh Sivan was on Sunday, which made Shabbos on the 7th, correct? Yeah, you all with me? I don't want to lose you. It's a little bit complicated. I don't want to lose you. Okay. So therefore, what happened? Here's the timetable. They arrived at Midbar Sinai on Sunday, which was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. B'chad b'shaba la'amar lu v'lamidi, says the Gemara, Hashem did not communicate with them on that Sunday, mishum chulsha d'orcha, because they were tired from the journey. But trei b'shaba, therefore on Monday, which was the 2nd of Sivan, amar lahu, he said to them the famous words, v'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim, you will be a nation of priests, you will be a special nation. Which is why, by the way, that tomorrow, the 2nd of Sivan, is called Yom HaMeyuchas, the day of specialness. It's the day when we became a special nation. It's the day that Hashem proclaimed that we would be a special nation. Betlasa, on the 3rd of the month, which was Tuesday according to him, Amar Lahu Mitzvahs Hagbala. He told them to distance themselves from the mountain. They weren't allowed to go on the mountain. They had to fence themselves off and not touch the mountain of Sinai. Be'arba, on the 4th of Sivan, which was Wednesday, Ovud Prisha, they separated. Men and women separated, husbands and wives separated, which they were told to do in preparation for the giving of the Torah as a purity experience. Therefore they separated Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then on Shabbos, there were 3 days of Prisha, 3 days of separation, and then Hashem gave the Torah on the Shabbos. That's the timetable according to Rabbi Yossi. Right? Again, Rosh Chodesh was on Sunday, Torah given on Shabbos, that's the 7th of Sivan. Number 5, that's the one opinion. V'Rabbanan Savri, the rabbis hold differently. B'trei b'shaba ikri yarchi, that the Rosh Chodesh was on Sunday. Sorry, Rosh Chodesh was on Monday, according to the rabbis, which made Shabbos the 6th, right? Rosh Chodesh was on Monday. Now, let's go through the timetable now. B'trei b'shaba, therefore on the Monday, which was the 1st of Sivan, la'amar lu v'lemidi, he didn't communicate with them, mishum chulshu d'orcha, because they were tired. B'tlasa, on the Tuesday, which according to them was the 2nd of Sivan, Amalu v'atim tiyuli, he told them you'll be a special nation. Be'arba, on the Wednesday, which was the 3rd of Sivan according to them, Amalu mitzvah sagbal, he told them to go far from the mountain. Yeah? And then B'chamisha, on the Thursday, which was the 4th of Sivan according to them, Ovud Prisha, they separated from their wives, husband and wife separated. They separated Thursday and Friday, and then Shabbos was the Torah. Clear? Okay. I just thought I'd just share that with you because it's interesting to get a perspective. Okay. Now, an interesting little pasuk which I want to share with you, at Orach Chaim says, just go back to the top of the page, the 3rd verse, the third line. It says on the 2nd of Siman, Moshe Allah El Halakim, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to God, right? It's interesting. It doesn't say that Hashem called him to come up. It says he went up on his own, right? Like he knew he had to go up, kind of thing. He ran up. Also, it doesn't say El Hashem. It says El Olakim, right? So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Reb Chaim Ben Attar, the famous commentary on the Chumash, says a beautiful thing. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu on the Monday morning or the Tuesday morning, whichever one it was, the 2nd of Sivan, he ran up the mountain on his own and he went towards Elokim. Why? Because the whole idea of the Omer, we know, the Sefer HaChinuch says, as he doesn't say this, but the Sefer HaChinuch says, is to show our yearning to get the Torah. Right? Our eagerness to want the Torah. We counted the days in order to get the Torah. Why do we do that? Because we knew when we left Egypt that was in fact the purpose of the Yetziat Mitzrayim. That was the purpose of the Exodus. Now how do we know that? So he mentions a very interesting pasuk. You know about the burning bush, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu witnessed the revelation of the burning bush. And Hashem called him and Hashem instructed him to become the leader of the Jewish people. And he said, go to Egypt, go to Pharaoh, tell them to take the Jews out, and you're going to lead the Jewish nation out of Egypt. And he said, B'hoitziacha es ha'am, when you take out the nation from Egypt, ta'avdun es Elokim, you will serve God ala hor hazeh, on this mountain, because the burning bush took place on Har Sinai. Long before, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu was still in Midian. But Hashem said, this mountain that you're seeing me on, this is the mountain I'm going to reveal myself on, And ta'avdun es Elokim al har hazeh, and you will serve God on this mountain. The term that God used for himself then in that pasuk was Elokim. For whatever reason. Ta'avdun es Elokim, you will serve God on this mountain. Fast forward, comes the Jewish people, they arrive at Har Sinai on the Rosh Chodesh. They're all united. Moshe Rabbeinu senses this is the time that we're going to get the Torah. So what does he do the next morning? He doesn't wait for Hashem to be called. He shows the desire the Jewish people have to get the Torah. He goes himself up the mountain. Moshe Allah el Elokim. He runs up the mountain. Yeah? He runs up the mountain himself. But it says Allah el Elokim. It uses the name Elokim, says the Orach Chaim, referencing the first pasuk where Hashem said that when you come out of the mountain, you will serve Elokim on this mountain. So Moshe Rabbeinu runs towards Elokim. He runs towards the purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He runs towards the purpose of the Exodus. He runs to fulfill the mission of Elokim, of serving Elokim on this mountain. Hashem sees that how eager he is. Hashem says he wants to get the Torah. So he calls to him and he gives him the instruction. He says, tell the Jewish people there'll be a special nation. He gives them the timetable and the instruction of preparation for the giving of the Torah. And eventually on the Shabbos, he reveals himself and he gives us the Torah. Okay? However, what we need to understand is this. I'm going to share with you an insight that comes from a few different places. One of them is a discourse that was said by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1969, before Shavuot. And he explains over there why it is that the Jews had to arrive dafka on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Why Rosh Chodesh specifically? Right? And Rosh Chodesh Sivan. There's something very unique about Rosh Chodesh Sivan, to the point where the Torah doesn't even reference it. The Torah says by Yom Hazeh, it's this day, as if it's a significant day. The day. This is the day that we finally arrived at the destination and having the ability to get the Torah. What is special about Rosh Chodesh Sivan? Okay? So he quotes an idea that goes like this. We know one of the prerequisites to getting the Torah is the concept which we call in Kabbalistic or Hasidic terminology, we call it bittul. Bittul means humility or complete surrender. Almost like self-negation. Right? Why is that so important? I've mentioned this idea before. At the end of the Amidah, before we take 3 steps back, there's a paragraph, right? After the last bracha about Sim Shalom, there's a paragraph called Elokai Netzor, right? Before we take 3 steps back. In that paragraph, there's a phrase we say, we ask God for humility. We say, V'nafshi ke'afar lakol tihiyeh, that my soul be like dust to everyone. Essentially like, let me feel humble, right? What's the phrase we say right after that? P'tach libi b'toratecha, open up my heart in Torah learning. And it's not by chance that those 2 phrases are together. Because we understand that a prerequisite to learning Torah, a prerequisite to connecting to Torah is the concept of humility, which you know from a Midrashic Gemara, which the Gemara tells us that God was choosing which mountain to give the Torah. The mountains had a debate among themselves. Each one thought they would get the Torah, the tallest mountain, the widest mountain, and so on and so forth. Har Sinai thought he's not even in the race, right? And Hashem said, no, that's the mountain I'm choosing because it's the lowest mountain, the mountain that symbolizes humility, right? So humility, the concept of surrender, complete humble, feeling of complete being humble, is a prerequisite to Torah. Why is it such a prerequisite to Torah? Because Torah is not just a subject. Torah is the wisdom of God. It's the infinite wisdom of God, right? It's an absolute truth. It's not just a theory. It's not just a discussion you can have on an intellectual basis where you can understand something one way or a different way. Torah is based on the essential truth. The truth, it's an absolute morality. It's an absolute truth. It's coming from an infinite God, right? We are finite people. To really connect to Torah, to really understand Torah, to really absorb Torah, to really be able to connect to God through the Torah is by definition almost an impossibility because we are finite human beings. The fact that Hashem allowed us to connect to Him through the Torah is an amazing gift. It's an amazing chidush, really, right? But it does require at least us giving up ourselves. It requires bittul, it requires that surrender. Right? Clear so far? That is very much connected to the concept of Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because Rosh Chodesh, what is Rosh Chodesh based on? Rosh Chodesh is based on the concept of what we call the Moilad Halavana, the birth of the new moon. Right? That's the whole idea of Rosh Chodesh. Like you might notice even in Shul, on Shabbos Mevorchim, before we give blessing to the new month, right? We announce the Moilad, we announce when the beginning of the cycle of the moon will take place, right? Because the Jewish calendar is based on the cycle of the moon, and it's based on the fact that the moon disappears at the end of the month and re-emerges, and that's when the cycle begins once again, and that's how the new month begins, and that's the concept of Rosh Chodesh, right? But we are taught that when the moon re-emerges again, or when it's born, as we say, we use the term Molad Alavana, it's a dot, it's a sliver, it's nothing, it's a what we call a nakudah, it's just a dot, that's all it is, at the very, very beginning, right? That's what Rosh Chodesh is. Rosh Chodesh symbolizes the dot, the emergence of this tiniest piece of the moon, right? Which is a symbol of humility. Which on a very simple level, before we take it deeper, is why it was specifically Rosh Chodesh, when the Jews come and they camp in unity, which by the way, unity also requires humility. That's the idea of unity. Unity means I'm ready to give up myself, I'm ready to make room for other people. Right? That's why unity and humility go hand in hand. So it was the day of Rosh Chodesh, which was a day of unity, a day that symbolized humility because of the dot of the new moon. And that was also gave rise to the ultimate unity that they were able to experience on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. That became the destination, that became the arriving point where they were able then to merit and have the ability to be ready for the giving of the Torah, and therefore the timetable began, the preparations began, and it was given a week later, or 6 days later, whatever. Right? Clear? However, there's two problems with this. I want to take it out on a much deeper level. Two problems is that if we're looking for a day of complete humility, we should take Erev Rosh Chodesh. Because Erev Rosh Chodesh, the moon disappears completely. Right? There's a moment where the moon completely disappears. There is no moon. That's real bittul, that's real surrender. Disappearance, self-negation. So if you're looking for complete humility, we should actually look for, it should have been Erev Rosh Chodesh, not Rosh Chodesh. Number one. Number two, if we're talking about Rosh Chodesh, I just thought this would be a good insight for today because the shir happens to be on Rosh Chodesh, so I thought this good Shavuos shir to give today. Right? If we're looking about Rosh Chodesh Sivan is a very special Rosh Chodesh. Why? Rosh Chodesh Sivan actually has a different imagery. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is not so much about the humility of the person, it's about the perfection of the person. Why? You know that we have the 7 weeks of the Omer, correct? The 7 weeks, why do we have 7 weeks of the Omer? Because we know that when God took us out of Egypt, we needed to go through a process of self-refinement in order to be ready to get the Torah on Shavuot, right? That process of self-refinement is connected to 7 because we are taught Kabbalistically that we have 7 midot, we have 7 levels of emotion, right? Each one of these 7 have also 7. So we've done this before. So we have, for example, the 7 are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Those are the 7. Loosely translated, Chesed is love, giving, Gvura is discipline, Tiferet is synthesis, balance, harmony, beauty, Netzach is ambition, Hod is humility, Yesod is bonding, connection with others, and Malchut is implementation or leadership or communication. It means all those things. Okay. That's the personality makeup of the human being. The emotional personality makeup, at least. We have 3 intellectual levels. That's something separate. So therefore, Hashem gives us 7 weeks. Each week is focused on another midah, right? So the first week focuses on Chesed, the next week was on Gevurah, and so on. The idea is to refine each of these personality traits, so that we should be fully refined, fully elevated, fully ready to get the Torah on Shavuot. Why is it 7 weeks, not 7 days? Because we are taught that each one of these 7 integrates with the other 7. So if you ever looked at a Siddur, you'll see with the Omer, the first day is called Chesed of Chesed, the second day is called Gvura of Chesed, then Tiferet of Chesed, Netzach of Chesed, right? So the first week is all the aspects of Chesed. The next week starts the Gvura week, again, starts the same thing. Chesed of Gevurah, Gevurah of Gevurah, Tiferet of Gevurah, Netzach of Gevurah, and so on, right? Whatever each of those days mean, there's a lot of written about it, but that's the concept. In these, so what's the ultimate perfection? Is when you're able to elevate the seventh one, which is Malchut, which is this week. This is the week of Malchut, right? We now start the seventh week of the Omer, Malchut. Within Malchut itself, when are we basically ready? On the third day. Why? Because in these 7 midot, the 3 primary midot are Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferet, right? So of course you have to go full 7 weeks. But when you come to the 7 weeks, Kabbalah teaches us, which is when they explain the uniqueness of Rosh Chodesh Sivan, when you come to the 7th week, which means you're already fixing the level of Malchut, right? Within the level of Malchut, you're already on the 3rd day. In other words, we're up to Tiferet of Malchut. We're basically done. This is it. This is like we've arrived. We've got a couple of things still to do till we get to Malchut of Malchut. But when you get to Tiferet of Malchut, that's what the terminology refers to as Shleimut HaBirur. It's the perfection of our refinement, and we're ready for the Torah. Right? So in a sense, what's happening here is that Rosh Chodesh Sivan, rather than the emphasis being on humility, in other words, self-negation, it's more about perfection of the self, if you know what I'm saying. Which isn't a bad thing. But the emphasis is different. It's not an emphasis on surrender, it's an emphasis on perfection and presence of self. So Rosh Chodesh Sivan being the day that we reach almost the perfection of self, of self-refinement. Is this making sense? Yep. So how does this go together with the fact that Rosh Chodesh Sivan is the day that we arrived and we're ready for the giving of the Torah, with the emphasis on humility, self-disappearance, self-negation, surrender being the key prerequisite to getting the Torah? How does this fit in with the concept that we chose Rosh Chodesh as opposed to Erev Rosh Chodesh, which is a bigger emphasis on humility, being that the moon disappears completely? And especially when we talk about Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we're actually being the 7th week of the Sphira, which is the Tiferet of Malchut, actually more focuses on self-perfection rather than self-negation. How does it all go together? And here comes a very, very deep idea, which is very integral and very, very crucial to the whole idea of giving, of surrendering to Hashem, and the concept of the humility that we're talking about. So let me explain to you in a few different ways. We know an idea which we've talked about before, that on Pesach we have no matzah. We eat matzah, right? Chametz is very bad. It's a very strict prohibition. Yet we find after Pesach, of course, we're allowed to eat chametz. Not only that, but when it came Shavuot, in the Beis HaMikdash in the temple, there was a special korban, a special sacrifice called Shtei HaLechem, the 2 breads, right? And normally in the Beis HaMikdash, when there was a flour offering, it was not chametz, it was always matzah, and never was allowed to rise. With 1 or 2 exceptions. One of the unique exceptions is the Shtei HaLechem, the 2 breads of Shavuot. Not only was it allowed to be chametz, it had to be chametz. So here's a strange thing. We get a prohibition on Pesach, we're not allowed to eat chametz. Chametz is considered a very bad thing. 7 weeks later, it's all of a sudden this amazing mitzvah. It's an obligation. You have to have chametz. Right? What's the idea? That is like this. There are 2 levels of humility. Or let's put it differently. There are 2 levels of surrender. Okay? Now, surrendering, submission to God is a very important thing. It's a prerequisite to connection with God. It's certainly a prerequisite to understanding the Torah. It's crucial. But there are 2 levels of surrender, where the first level seems like a deeper surrender, or more of humility, but actually it's the other way around. The second level is a bigger surrender. Let me explain to you why. So the first level of surrender is what we call self-negation. That's matzah. What is matzah? Why is chametz so bad on Pesach? Because chametz, we always say, represents ego. It rises. It's the ego of the human being. Right? Want to form a relationship with God? Pesach, we were born as a nation. We need to get rid of the ego. So no matzah. Even a little bit of ego is terrible. Correct? Therefore, we get rid of the ego completely. Even a crumb of chametz is no good. Only matzah. Matzah is total surrender. Doesn't rise. It's a symbol of total We lose ourself completely and we are totally submitted and surrendering to God. In fact, the Maharal of Prague explains that why is matzah connected with freedom when at the same time we find in the Gemara that matzah is called the bread of a poor man. Says the Maharal, no, that's exactly the point. Real freedom comes from getting rid of yourself, becoming poor in a good sense. In other words, letting go of everything of yourself that's standing in the way so that you can graduate and connect to a completely higher reality, a godly reality, which none of yourself is standing in the way. Right? That's total surrender, total self-negation, total bitul as we call it, self-nullification. However, the problem with that, now that's a surrender that's crucial. And at the beginning of the process, when we start Pesach, when we first leave Egypt, when we were spiritually very unrefined and very immature, the only way to have any connection with God is matzah. We have to just get rid of ourselves and just totally give up. Right? However, there's a problem with that surrender. Because that surrender is, on the one hand, absolute surrender, absolute self-nullification. But in a way, it's an untested surrender. Because how have you surrendered? By getting rid of yourself. What happens when the functional self comes back? Then it stands in the way again. Right? So in Kabbalah we learn that real surrender is to introduce self, to be fully functional, to be fully present, and still surrender. Understand? In other words, let me explain it a little bit in a different way, so it'll be clearer. We have taught there are different layers of the neshama, right? The neshama has 5 layers. We call that layer of behavior, the layer of emotion, the layer of cognition, the layer of subconscious, and then there's what we call the pintalayid, the spark of the Jewishness, right? Which every Jew has and every Jew believes, and so on and so forth. So we say, for example, when Jews throughout the ages, when they were tested with the challenge of idol worship, right? They would say, either you convert or you jump into the fire. And they jumped into the fire. They had Mesirut Nefesh. What was happening at that point, right? What was happening at that point was that the depth of the Jewishness, the total connection to God just came out in full-blown measure, and everything else just disappeared. You could say that was a moment of total surrender, right? You know, where we can relate to it a little bit. For example, think of the end of Yom Kippur when we scream Shema Yisrael, right? It's like that moment that nothing else matters, right? And we are taught, in fact, it does say that on Yom Kippur that part of the neshama comes out strong, right? Everything else just disappears and only us and God, right? Total surrender. The problem often happens is, take Yom Kippur for example, the next day we come back to ourselves and we're back to square one. Like, are we changed, right? What happened? Yesterday we sang Shema Yisrael, we were just going to do it and it was unbelievable and we were going to be the best person, we were going to do tshuva, the whole thing, right? It doesn't always happen that way. Why? Because when we were in that moment, it was total surrender. We let go of ourselves. We let go of our unrefined layers so that our pure surrender ability should be revealed. And that's what happens. Right? The guy jumps into the fire, maybe on a day-to-day basis didn't even function as such a great Jew. But when he was challenged with his core beliefs, he says, that's it, I'm God, I'm jumping into the fire. Right? That's kind of a total surrender. What that means is that the functional parts of the human being are not surrendering. They're being kicked out of the way. What's surrendering is really the purity of the person. So the surrender is being packaged in a way where everything else is disappearing. Right? Real humility, in other words, real surrender, real loss of ego, is to have the ability to be present, to have all our faculties about us, to be able to think rationally, to be able to feel emotionally, to be able to function normally, and yet to be totally humble, to surrender completely. In other words, not to be functional, and yet to surrender. That's a much deeper surrender. Follow me? At the very beginning when we left Egypt, that doesn't work. Because we were just full of ego. So the only way to surrender then was to let go, like the Maharal says. Let go of yourself. Get rid of the chametz. However, through the process of the Omer, where we refine ourselves, where we elevate ourselves, where we learn to use our emotions, our cognition, our behaviors in a way which is consistent with godly values, where we try to remove the ego, but not the actual faculty itself. And we don't remove our emotions, we just remove the ego from the emotions. We don't remove our thinking, we just remove the ego from the thinking. But we reintroduce the self. We reintroduce our emotions, we reintroduce the sense of self. When we get to Shavuot, chametz becomes a mitzvah. Because that's the real surrender. Where you bring yourself back, you're present, you're there. And yet you're there, but you're totally humble. You're there, less minus the ego, but you're still functional. So Pesach, we can't do that. Pesach, the ego is mixed into everything. So all we can do is get rid of the ego, which means getting rid of total self-negation, disappearing almost, and saying, God, I'm just yours. I'll let myself go. Problem is that when the self comes back, who said you're going to surrender then? The real surrender is to be able to bring yourself back and still surrender. Still be humble. That's the chametz that we eat on Shavuot. That is the ultimate relationship with God. And that is very much connected with the concept of Torah learning. More than mitzvot, actually. Where do we see this? We see this in Torah learning. See, when you learn Torah, right? When you learn Torah, two things have to happen. We are taught you cannot really understand the truth of Torah properly unless you're humble, which is why, as I said before, we say at the end of the Amidah, our soul should be like dust, please give me your Torah, so to speak, right? Because we know that humility is a complete prerequisite for Torah study. Yet, interestingly enough, how does Torah study work? It requires a tremendous presence of mind. Torah study, by definition, is for you to understand with your consciousness, with your cognition, with your understanding. If you walked into a yeshiva and you see people killing each other, it's because they're arguing. Right? That's a chavrusas work. That's how the Star Wars learning was. We learn a Rashi, I think Rashi means like this, my chavrusa thinks Rashi means something different, and we scream at each other because we each defend our position. We really listen to another position, but we're going to defend our position because that's how Torah works. You need to convince me that it's not the way, the pshat isn't right. Because I need to understand it with my brain. I can't just say, okay, you must be right. No, surrender. No. Torah has to be understood with our brains. The idea is to understand the wisdom of Hashem. The idea is to internalize the wisdom of Hashem. How do you internalize the wisdom of God? By understanding it, by asking questions, by analyzing, by synthesizing, by contrasting, by asking contradictions, by giving questions, answers, and so on. Obviously, all within the submission to the truth of the Torah, without deviating, without distorting its truth. But nevertheless, it's got to be understood, and there's room for machlokah, there's room for dispute. Bei Shammai, Bei Hillel, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, there's room for different Rashi Tosfos, right? See, we have two things coexisting when it comes to Torah. A loss of self, complete humility, and yet complete presence. Right? So I'll tell you a fascinating thing that is explained elsewhere. When the Jews walked around, when they had the Mishkan, right? And the holiest object of the Mishkan was the Ark. What was in the Ark? The Ten Commandments, the Luchas. Which ones? Both. The broken ones and the whole ones, we are told. The Gemara says that in the Aron was the Luchais v'Shivrei Luchais. You had the second tablets, which was the whole ones, and the broken pieces of the previous one. Right? Why do we have the broken pieces? I mean, we had to replace them. They were broken, so we got a second set, right? Why do we have the first set? So one of the explanations is a beautiful idea. That we say that each had a function. The broken Luchais represented the broken person, the humble person. Broken is a symbol of humility. The complete Luchais represent the presence of the person. The ultimate connection to Hashem is the combination of both. That's why in the Ark, which was the holiest spot, which represented the connection that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Torah, the Ark was a combination of the broken piece of Luchais and the whole Luchais. See, it's different to mitzvahs. When we keep mitzvahs symbolize something different. Mitzvahs symbolize total surrender, especially the mitzvahs of chukim, which is a good thing. We need to remind ourselves of total surrender once in a while, right? A mitzvah you got to keep even if you don't understand. In fact, there are some mitzvahs that we don't understand. There's some mitzvahs which are called chukim, which God didn't explain the reason. Right? Because that's an important part of obedience, an important part of our training. we need a matzah part of our training too. So therefore, important part of our training is that we submit to the will of God without understanding. We'll do the paraduma, we'll keep kashrut, we don't understand the reason, doesn't make any sense some of the time, doesn't matter, we're God's, right? But Torah doesn't work like that. It's not supposed to work like that. If you learn a piece of Mishnah or Gemara and you don't understand what you're talking about, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. The mitzvah of Torah is only if you understand. And yet, the only way you could really connect to its truth is through humility. But it's that deeper level of humility. It's humility with your head about you, with your faculties intact. That's why the Aron had the luchais and the shvira luchais, the ark, the complete tablets and the broken piece of tablets. The beginning, the cycle has to start with total surrender. That's how it works. It's got to start with matzah. Because if we start with ourselves, we never get anywhere. Because ourselves, our default position is ego. Right? So we've got to get rid of ourselves first. We've got to start with the matzah, but then the idea is to reintroduce self, and with ourself, with a sense of self and presence, to have the same humility as we do with the matzah. That the chometz should be in line with the matzah. The chometz of Shavuot is in line with the matzah. This plays out in a very, very famous Gemara on Shavuos. Famous Gemara is, what's the catchphrase of Matan Torah, the beautiful thing that the Jews said on the 5th of Sivan, Na'aseh v'nishma, correct? Na'aseh v'nishma. The Gemara said, so amazing, Na'aseh v'nishma, they said we will do before they said we'll understand. Now if you look in the Chumash, you will notice an amazing thing. That's not all what they said. There's a couple of different psukim. There's a few psukim where the Jews just said, whatever Hashem says, Na'aseh we will do. Start, period. No nishma, just do. Later it says that the Jews said, whatever we'll do, whatever Hashem says, Na'aseh v'nishma. We'll first do and then we'll listen. So the Gemara says that when the Jews said Na'aseh before nishma, so this, the fact that they put the Na'aseh before the nishma, in other words, they were willing to surrender even before they understood, was so amazing and so great that when they said this, 600,000 angels came down, says the Gemara, and they gave each of the Jews 2 crowns. 1 crown for Na'aseh, 1 crown for nishma. Right? So the obvious question is, you hold on a second. The math doesn't work here. The Gemara, first of all, if submission is so great, so then the time they said Na'aseh without the nishma is even better. Forget about understanding, just Na'aseh. Second of all, what does this Gemara mean? When the angels came down, when the Jews said Na'aseh before nishma, then they got 2 crowns, 1 for Na'aseh, 1 for nishma. One second, why are they getting the crown? For the saying Na'aseh before the nishma, so then 1 crown is enough. Are they getting the crown for Na'aseh and for nishma? So then it's 2 crowns. Understand that. But then why does the Gemara talk about that this was a reward for putting Na'aseh before nishma? If it's a reward for Na'aseh before nishma, it should be 1 crown or 3 crowns. In other words, if they're going to get a crown for Na'aseh and nishma, then they should get 1 for Na'aseh, 1 for nishma, and 1 for putting the Na'aseh before the nishma. Right? But the answer is this. The answer is like this. The answer is 2 crowns, but in that order. In other words, like this. They didn't get a crown when they just said Na'aseh. Na'aseh is step 1. Na'aseh is total surrender. Self-negation. We'll just do whatever he tells us to do. That wasn't the ultimate connection. The ultimate connection was Na'aseh v'nishma. The nishma is important. It's not just that they said the Na'aseh before the nishma. Yes, the order is important. The surrender comes first. But they committed to surrendering and going to the deeper level of surrendering. That they would surrender v'nishma and will carry forth that surrender, that humility, in the understanding. That even when we do understand, and we're going to understand, and we're going to commit to understand, we'll still have the Na'aseh there. We won't leave the nishma. We're not going to not understand. In a way, it's easier to be humble when you don't understand. Total surrender is easier. I won't think, I won't ask questions, I'll just do it. That's real surrender, right? But no, that's not the purpose. The purpose is Na'aseh v'nishma. Say Na'aseh and then nishma, and the combination of both in that order is what got them the 2 crowns. Because you have to have, both things are beautiful. Na'aseh and nishma. Because nishma has a purpose. You need the complete luchas. You need Torah. You need to understand Torah. You need to ask questions. You need to internalize it. You need to really get it. You need to be present. You need to be, the whole of you needs to serve Hashem, including your brain, your heart, everything. Not just your spark of your neshama. Everything about you has to be given over to Hashem. Your understanding, your consciousness, your emotion, everything. How do we achieve that? Nishma. Nishma on the foundation of Na'aseh, but it's got to be Na'aseh v'nishma. That's what the greatness of Na'aseh v'nishma is. It's even greater than just saying Na'aseh. They did just say Na'aseh in the beginning. But then they went even deeper and they said Na'aseh v'nishma. That surrender, that bittul, that humility will even be when we're present. Now we come back to Rosh Chodesh. That's why Rosh Chodesh is the day of preparation for the giving of the Torah. Not Erev Rosh Chodesh. Erev Rosh Chodesh is a great day. Erev Rosh Chodesh is the disappearance of the moon. Rosh Chodesh is the appearance of the moon, and yet still humble. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is the day of humility, but it's a day of the Shleimut Habiru. It's the day of the completion, of the self-perfection, the self-refinement. Because true humility is when you are refined. True humility is when you bring back your chesed and your gvura and your tiferet and your malchut. You've got to bring back all of your faculties and still surrender to Hashem. Still be completely committed to Hashem. That's why it was Rosh Chodesh, not Erev Rosh Chodesh. And specifically Rosh Chodesh Sivan, where we reach the ultimate level of preparation for Matan Torah. Because the Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the moon is there, it's not disappeared. It's there, but it's humble. It's there, but it's a dot. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is even more than a dot. It's the concept that we actually have perfected ourselves. We're fully present. We've got to the main part of the seventh midah, which is Tiferet of Malchut. And yet, in line with the humility, in line with the surrender, in line with the Naseh, in line with the whole concept of being completely given over to God. Which, by the way, going back to the whole concept of Shavuot, going back to the concept of Har Sinai, again, the same idea. The Gemara says that God chose Har Sinai because He wanted humility. He wanted something humble. He wanted a low mountain. So the famous question is, if God wanted humility, He should have given the Torah in a valley. Why a mountain altogether? Mountain, even the smallest mountain, shows strength, shows presence. The answer is that's true humility. A valley means complete self-surrender, self-negation, but then you're not there. A mountain is you are there, but you're humble. And that's why it's Har, but Har Sinai. That's a Har, it's present, but you're there. It's a complete luchat, present, understanding, using your brain, but the broken luchat at the same time. It's Naseh and Nishma together. It's the beginning of the moon plus the perfection of self-refinement. All things work together. And that's how we approach Matan Torah. And that's what Shavuot is all about. Shavuot is all about is after the whole process of Pesach and the Sfiras Omer, we get to the level where we commit to learning Torah. And learning Torah means that we commit to learning with our brain and our understanding and our heart. That we understand, that we ask questions, and we are present. And yet we fully surrender, fully committed to the truth and the humility of giving ourselves over to a higher being. And that's the combination, that's the secret of how we succeed in learning and connecting to the Torah. So I wish you everyone Chag Sameach and a meaningful Shabbat. Thank you. All right. Was that okay? Was that clear? Was it, yeah? The filling? Okay. It's a bit of a deep idea. What's that? Yeah? That's actually the truth is that's the ultimate of Jewish leadership. I mean, Jewish leadership comes very much like that. That's why Shaul HaMelech actually. It's another part of it also that Shavuot is about David HaMelech. It also fits in actually. Because Shaul HaMelech